Szaga miseczna, zorana jasnaja, widna chociolki zbieraj. Widy, kochana, ja pracę już zmorena, choć na chwiliną kuchaj. Tyż nie lekaj se szelni żonki wosy, zmoczesz holodną rosą. Jaż tebe mila, ja aż...
What a year we're having, and what about 3 years? I thought it would all get better. Actually, I knew it wouldn't, because I knew they'd have to produce something else after COVID. So guess what they do? They bring up Ukraine. Anyway, I'm here with Alice Grant, and we have different perspectives on things. But anything we say may not be true. At the moment, they're of course trying to get us back into the EU.
Yes.
And I think that's why they put the yellow and blue flags everywhere, suddenly, psychologically. Okay?
That's a very good
because
point.
Suddenly,
That's a very good point.
yes,
They are
suddenly they
definitely,
put on top of number 10 a yellow and blue flag, as if we've ever cared about the Ukraine before.
Yes, exactly. They're weaponizing this issue. They're starting to push the, further integration into the EU is the only way we can be saved. But actually what I see here is that the EU doesn't stand a chance against Russia and her allies, which is China. And quite frankly, what we see on a geopolitical level is the dwindling economic power and political power of the US, which was once obviously this unipolar, had this global hegemony and dominance over world politics, and the EU, on the other hand, which are also a disintegrating power, and instead we see the rise of China and Russia. And in truth, there's no way that we can combat this.
Yeah, but what's funny is we're always hearing all the time how, Russia is losing, Russia is a problem, Russia. I honestly believe that there's a major problem with actually billionaires now, because they're ruling the world. It doesn't matter whether they're in Russia or whether they're in the rest of the world, they are trying to rule it.
Yes, there's this global elite.
Yes.
And there's also then, of course, the interests of the people, which are two very different things.
Yes, they're very different
what I find
things.
especially interesting in this conflict is that obviously on the most basic level we can see that, okay, so it's between Ukraine and Russia, but actually what's really going on here, and you can see this on a macro level, which is fascinating, is that there's also this emerging combat between these two financial systems. The US dollar and its financial system, which has had this grip on the world and has established and fortified the US as the supreme kind of power.
Yeah. And it was based against the oil as well.
Yeah.
So of course,
and then we
petrodollar.
Have, yes, exactly. And then we have the emerging Chinese empire, which itself has now established a financial system. So these sanctions which we've just imposed on Russia, which is supposedly SWIFT, getting rid of Russia from SWIFT. So that obviously will curtail them a lot.
Exactly, but I just thought this was absolutely ridiculous.
What's fascinating is that China have established their own financial system, and yes, it's in its nascent stages, but this is the future, and Russia have China as an ally. While we have been basically committing the ultimate self-sabotage, we've been demilitarizing, decarbonizing, we have been degrading ourselves culturally over here in the West. Russia have been building themselves up. They've been building out their industries. They've been, under Putin, we've seen a lot of social cohesion in Russia. We're seeing, I guess the way that Britain used to be pre-World War I.
Exactly. So what do you think that Putin has actually achieved for Russia?
Well, he's been very aggressive in his foreign policy, but also very, very stern and firm with it, because obviously, as we see, we know that ultimately this conflict has been caused by NATO. The long-term cause of the present-day invasion of Ukraine has been aggressive NATO expansion.
Exactly.
But what's interesting is that Russia has always made her position clear and said, this, Ukraine and any troops placed in Ukraine would be a very severe military security risk to Russia, and we will not have this. Of course, it makes sense. Like, America governs the Western Hemisphere, as Professor Mearsheimer was saying. Russia has obviously very vested interests in the countries which occupy its western border. So the fact that NATO has been slowly since the 90s really expanding and consuming and swallowing up these nations which literally border Russia, I mean, it's, you know, is obviously very worrying to Russia, understandably. And after numerous times where Putin has made his position clear, it's happened now. So the West, the kind of surprise and confusion we see is only because of a deep misunderstanding of what has gone on.
So, I mean, I always thought of the Ukraine, and you can answer this, was one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Suddenly we're hearing that they're the angels from the sky.
Exactly.
I'm a bit confused.
And Zelensky's this amazing hero.
Yeah, and then we see him, you know, wearing red high heels and dancing. Not that I mind all this stuff, because I'm actually very pro-LGBT XYZ, but the truth is, he is a character, and he is actually the puppet, supposedly, of Ihor Kolomoisky, exactly. You know that these people have a lot of money. He's a huge oligarch.
Yes,
he's meant to have diddled the people of the Ukraine out of millions of dollars, pounds, and also he owned all the television stations, so it was complete propaganda over there.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's complete propaganda here too, all over the West, and even in Russia. The thing is that we cannot trust the media whatsoever. We have to look at the facts, the economic facts. We have to look at the markets and see what's going on there, because then you realise the fact that, you know, everything has, you know, strategic motive behind it. Fair play to the European nations. I think we do have economic power, but without raw materials, that comes to nothing.
And also, you know, Ukraine is very, very valuable. It, you know, it produces wheat, it produces eggs, basic things like
Russia,
chickens. Yeah. I mean, you know, it produces more than everywhere else in Europe. But in any case, to try and turn a whole lot of Ukrainians into Europeans is a very difficult thing. It's, you know, it's like bringing Romanians into England. Yeah. You know, we're very, very different, and we all have to integrate, of course. But this is huge integration. I don't think it would really work.
It's madness,
yes.
Amanda. It's madness, and the reason why is because not only does Ukraine have such deep historical ties to Russia, and many of them are ethnically Russian in Ukraine. They speak the language, the Russian language, especially in the Donbass region. And we know that these regions essentially voted to be autonomous from both Russia and Ukraine. And that hasn't been respected. That was enshrined in the Minsk Treaty. That wasn't respected by Ukraine.
Well, they didn't stick to the Minsk Treaty at all.
No, not at all. The Ukrainian government, and together with its military, of which many of its elements are fascist forces,
yes,
as we all know, they completely disrespected that treaty. And of course, Putin, as part of his, or as stated by him, he sees that part of his kind of reason for targeting Ukraine is also to protect these people, many of whom are Russian ethnically. So yes. I don't know how much truth there is in his claim that he's protecting these people. And yeah, they're appealing to emotion, which, you know, is understandable. I think obviously I do feel extremely, you know, my heart is with the Ukrainian people who have had, you know, who have been subject to this violence. But at the same time, we have to be clear about this and look at what's in Britain's interests, because that is my priority. My priority is Britain, and my priority is peace. And what I see is that this stoking of tensions that we've seen from Boris Johnson is deeply irresponsible. And this kind of, you know, trying to see if you can tame and subdue Russia, it's not going to happen.
Well, they know that.
I know, exactly. They know that, and it's funny because, you know, at the same time, do NATO want to be involved? Do we really want to go to World War III over Ukraine?
Go to war.
No, because Ukraine is not of strategic interest at the end of the day. Yes, okay, there's vested interests from Biden, but ultimately, Ukraine and Eastern Europe, that has very little to do with our island here. And we've already got a lot of problems that we need to deal with. So it just seems ridiculous that people have been radicalised by the media into actually wanting to go to war. I mean, how mad do you have to be to think that's an acceptable solution to this? More fighting, more death, and especially when Putin has been very open with the fact that he has nuclear power and he's willing to use it.
And I believe him.
Believe him, because you know one thing about Putin, unlike Western leaders, he's very clear about what he's going to do, and he says it and then he does it. And it's the same even with China, and to some degree. I mean, earlier in February 4th, Moscow, Beijing came out with a joint declaration saying that their partnership, their international partnership, was unlimited. What should that tell us? That should tell us, okay,
well, they don't want somebody bossing them around like America, which is a faded power. You know, I feel sorry on another level. You know, the oligarchs. You know, I know quite a few oligarchs, And although we don't feel very sorry for them, because of course they've got billions to go through, I mean, actually, to take their houses, take their boats, they're very happy that they supported the whole of Sloane Street all this time and Bond Street, and supported our property market and supported our boat building facilities. They're very happy that the south of France, they went round the world, using the ports of south of France, Sardinia, and now they're all having everything stolen. I think it's an appalling thing. 500,000 people have lost their jobs through the confiscation of little goodies from the Russian people.
Yeah, it's doing nothing.
And they're accused of black marketeering and all sorts of things, but they might not have been. I mean, it needs to go to court. It needs to be checked, because you can easily go. I mean, I'm very upset personally about Abramovich. I always thought actually Abramovich was a bit of a hero. He took over Chelsea. It was a bit of I hate to say it, a second-rate sort of football company, and now it's first rate, and it's going to close in 3 weeks if they don't find a buyer. All sorts of things like this will happen. It's a salami effect. It's very, very, very disingenuous of all of us to attack people that we were very happy to support us. It's disgusting.
That's so true. And as you were saying, on a wider point about all these kind of sanctions and the response from the West, from the EU, from the UK, ultimately, who is this targeting? Who are these sanctions targeting? They're targeting the people, and they're specifically designed, especially in Russia, to cause insurrection and insurgents. But I would also be adamant that Ukraine remains a neutral nation between Russia and the West, because it needs to be. It needs to be. And the reason why, and our failure to ensure that it remained a buffer between Russia and Europe is why this has happened.
Yeah.
NATO's aggressive expansionist policy, America's imperialistic ambitions, and of course it's resulted in this aggressive retaliation from Putin. And ultimately, if these people genuinely, if Biden, if Boris, if they really cared about Ukrainian lives, they would have ensured that none of this, that Ukraine would have remained neutral. None of this would have happened.
So you were given the opportunity to put it all right. So basically, you've got to get religion.
Yeah, of course. Christ the King has to reign.
Okay. And how will the Jews feel?
Because, well, the Jewish people are part of the kind of what it says in the New Testament is that they have to convert ultimately.
Basically, there is no religion, and that is the problem. There is no... and
because what's interesting in Russia, of course, is that Putin has, along with reviving Russian industries and taking a completely different approach from his communist predecessors like Lenin and Stalin. In fact, he's very much against all that. He's been reviving Russian Orthodoxy.
Yes.
And that has been an enormous factor in creating social unity in Russia. And, the thing is that if we really think that Russia is going to suffer because they don't have Nike or Pornhub or Twitter anymore, it's a joke.
Or Facebook.
Facebook. No, I'm sorry, but actually, all the better for them.
I know they were laughing about McDonald's and all the awful imports we've done.
Yeah.
I mean, and let's be honest, it's not got a good Chanel. Basically, do you think that it can change? We're heading along a very quick road to absolute devastation.
Wow.
And it's going to be devastation. Everybody, my father once said to me, don't worry, stop worrying about these things. It never happens in Paris, London or New York. But I'm sorry, it is happening. Yes, it's happening financially. You can see by
the world's getting crazy. They're getting more desperate to enforce their 2030 agenda, and this is the result.
Okay, so
but ultimately, the Immaculate Heart will triumph. So pray the Rosary.
Yes, okay. So we're going to. We've got 7 years before 2030, where it's the total reset.
Well, they've been speeding it along. I think COVID helped. Now, of course, they utilise any crisis really. So any opportunity they have to forward it on, to push forward. And we have to be like that too. We have to be just as militant as they are, but for fighting for the truth, for fighting for justice.
For truth and freedom of thought. I mean, look at Assange lying in jail.
Can you imagine?
Okay, so we haven't had a war, but we're heading to it. And do you think that this war will be still continuing in a year?
It really all depends whether Zelensky comes to his senses. But also if the EU comes to their senses, because at the moment, as we can see, the EU have basically been encouraging Zelensky, which is just ridiculous. I mean, he thinks that he can have the military backup of NATO and of the US and of the EU.
But
it's not going to happen. They're lying to him. They're encouraging him, and in his foolishness, really. He thinks that the Ukraine can somehow fight this out. They can't. They really can't. And I mean, time will tell, but